Economic situation, the job losses at Pacific Brands and the day's other economic news. I was joined earlier from Canberra by the Shadow Treasurer, Joe Hockey. Joe Hockey, thanks for coming in.
Good evening, Leigh.
Let's start with the news about the Pacific Brands job losses. Do you believe that there's anything the government can do now to save those jobs?
Well, there doesn't appear to be anything the government can do because the government said that it had contacted the company and the company stated quite clearly they were going to close those particular operations. But there's a lot the government can do to stop further job losses. And the single most important thing the government can do is to have a message of hope, a message that says that they are confident that we can get through this significant downturn. And I would urge Prime Minister Rudd to take a leaf out of President Obama's book today, where the message was hope and aspiration, and a belief that America can get out of it. And if the President of the United States can do that, surely our Prime Minister could do the same.
Given that the opposition is constantly criticising the $42 billion stimulus package and saying that it's going to ruin the economy, it's going to cost jobs, you're not exactly peddling hope yourselves.
Well, that's because the government's got it wrong, and we are pointing out that the government has got it wrong. They've spent too much, too early. And in fact, what the government did today, sadly, was the benchmark by which the government had judged itself. Wayne Swan said that this $10 billion cash splash just before Christmas would create 75,000 jobs. And people should not let him off the hook in relation to his change of language from create to support. Whatever the case, only a month ago, the Treasurer said that the anecdotal evidence he was getting was that socks and jocks sales had increased, and therefore the cash splash worked. Well, today, the biggest socks and jocks manufacturer in the country sacked 1,850 workers. So if by their own benchmarks their package didn't work, then the government stands condemned for wasting $10 billion of taxpayers' money. OK, you raised benchmarks, and it seems clear that the coalition is using the benchmark of job losses to gauge the effectiveness or otherwise of the government's measures. As the Shadow Treasurer, what would you see as an acceptable level of job losses given the global situation? Well, let me go back. The government set themselves this benchmark, Leigh. It's not the opposition that did it. The government did it. The government has, by total account now, spent and committed an extra $80 billion since the last budget. And they said that those extraordinary fiscal measures, those extraordinary fiscal stimulus packages, made up of a whole lot of different components, would create and support 330,000 jobs. That was their justification. So are you saying that if we don't see 330,000 new jobs created over the next couple of years, that you'll view this package as a failure? Is that the opposition's yardstick? No, that's the government's test. The government set that as their test for the success or otherwise of this package. We are doing what a responsible opposition should do and holding the government to account for its own words. And understand this, Leigh, it has been an extraordinary package. Even the Assistant Governor of the Reserve Bank gave a speech only about a week ago where he said that the Australian extraordinary fiscal stimulus packages were larger than comparable countries. Larger than comparable countries. It is widely recognised Australia has gone into this downturn in better shape than almost any other comparable country, and at the same time our central bank has eased monetary policy almost more aggressively than most other countries. So the combination of an easing of monetary policy, extraordinary fiscal stimulus packages, very large, and the base upon which it was all built means that Australia has, under Kevin Rudd, gone harder and faster than any other comparable country. And now what we see is job losses that he could not prevent. Well, Glenn Stevens, the head of the Reserve Bank, said to the House Economics Committee last week that if the government had waited longer, then the more ammunition you have to try to spend to stave off crises. So he felt that these issues get a self-fulfilling momentum behind them and that it's best to act quickly and throw the best that you've got at it. You obviously disagree with the head of the Reserve Bank. Well, we will disagree from time to time. It was the Reserve Bank that increased interest rates late in 2007 and early in 2008 and said that inflation was a greater challenge for the economy than the looming credit crisis in the United States. Well, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but at that time Malcolm Turnbull and Joe Hockey were warning that in fact the credit crisis was going to have a profound impact on Australia and inflation was not the number one challenge. So now, having said that, I think the Reserve Bank overall has worked tirelessly to try and address the challenges that we have, particularly in relation to credit flows. Put that aside, it is widely recognised that Australia has gone more aggressively into a stimulus package and together with an extraordinary easing of monetary policy, Australia would be hoping under Kevin Rudd that it's a 100-metre sprint and not a marathon. Because at the end of the marathon, I really question whether we're going to have enough petrol in the tank to get to the line.
Do you agree with Julia Gillard that we're going to see more days like today with these job losses such as we've seen at Pacific Brands?
Well, her language is extraordinary, isn't it? At the same time, almost exactly the same time, as the President of the United States is speaking to his Congress and giving a message of hope, the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia is warning that everything's going to get far worse. And this is in trend with the Rudd government, of course, so that's what they've been doing.
But isn't it wise to be straight with the Australian people and tell it like it is?
Well, I think the Australian people know that it's very tough out there. I don't think the Australian people need to have their leaders reminding them that it's going to get far worse. I think what you'll see over the next few months is Kevin Rudd try to politically inoculate the Australian people for bad news, because politically he doesn't want to accept any responsibility for what is happening. The bottom line is that this government has made the downturn far worse for many Australians, and Australians will pay for it with their jobs.
Isn't it the case, if we return to the Pacific Brands issue, that successive governments have been artificially propping up the textile sector for years, if not decades, and that it was inevitable, due to the forces of globalisation, that these job losses were going to happen someday?
Well, I'm not sure that that's the case. You can never accept there is an inevitability about job losses. You should never accept it.
Well, when the Howard government was in power, 40,000 jobs were lost in the textiles sector.
Well, there's unquestionably